Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin, Tjong-Alvares with the news from the world economy. Coming up, fighting in Yemen gets a break to let in aid. And Bulgaria's working poor feel hopeless. First, the headlines. China cut interest rates for the third time in 6 months amid a worse-than-expected economic slowdown. The People's Bank of China lowered benchmark lending and deposit rates by 0.25 percentage point. Beijing fears the mountain of debt resulting from the rapid expansion of credit in recent years is weighing on efforts to pick up the economy. Easing measures taken by the central bank, including 2 previous rate reductions since November, have largely failed to spur new loan demand. But Asian shares took heart from the move, trading largely higher. We stay in China, which overtook the United States as the world's top importer of crude oil for the first time in April. China's crude oil imports hit nearly 7.4 million barrels a day, and its purchases are expected to remain strong despite a slowing economy. China is already the world's biggest energy consumer, with oil by far the largest traded energy market. Beijing is the top user of almost all commodities, including coal, iron ore, and most metals, with far-reaching implications for markets which continue to shift from west to east. As Athens reaches its biggest repayment to the IMF to date, bank regulators in southeastern Europe have started prepping for a Greek default. Greece, the IMF's biggest debtor, owes the Global Fund 35 billion euros, of which 750 million euros are due on Tuesday. Greek banks are big players in some of their neighbors' financial systems, owing as much as a quarter of banking assets in Bulgaria and Macedonia. The IMF said it is working with national authorities in southeastern Europe on contingency plans for a Greek default. U.S. companies are sitting on nearly $2 trillion overseas as boardrooms are reluctant to repatriate the money, Moody's Investor Services said. Moody's analysis showed 4% growth in the cash on corporate balance sheets of companies excluding the financial sector over the past year. 50 U.S. boardrooms sit on $1 trillion of the cash, while only 5 U.S. companies hoard more than a quarter of the total amount, or $500 billion. Cheap borrowing costs have kept companies from using foreign cash as they seek to avoid a tax bill on profits earned abroad. And corporate tax reform that might incentivize U.S. companies to repatriate funds is unlikely for now. Humanitarian aid will finally find its way into Yemen this week following the start of a 5-day ceasefire between Iranian-led Houthi militants and a Saudi-led Arab coalition. But for now, it remains unclear how the renewable ceasefire might affect the Yemenites or how it might affect the price of crude oil in the long run.
A 5-day humanitarian ceasefire will go into effect in Yemen this week after U.S.-backed Saudis and Iranian-backed Houthis both agreed to the move.
We have made a decision that the ceasefire will begin this Tuesday, May 12th at 11 p.m. and will last for 5 days and is subject to renewal.
The crisis in Yemen has impacted oil markets as Saudi Arabia's involvement has been sending prices up, and the news of ceasefire tempered that rise. Yemen, located on a key oil transport route, is a relatively small producer of oil, accounting for about 0.1% of the world's production in 2013, but that production accounts for 70% of government revenue, according to the Wall Street Journal. And that production has been disrupted by the Houthi advance on government loyalists and the Saudi bombing campaign. Meanwhile, the ceasefire is ostensibly focused on getting humanitarian aid into hard-hit areas.
Humanitarian catastrophe is building, and that they are running out of food, they're running out of medicine, they're running out of fuel, and clearly it is an important moment.
The material situation is dire for many. 150,000 have been displaced since late March of this year. Yemen, already one of the poorest countries in the Middle East with more than half the population of 25 million living in poverty, is also facing a shrinking food and fuel supply.
You see how bad the situation is. The bread distributed today is not enough. It cannot satisfy the needs of all residents.
The violence has left more than 1,400 dead and 6,000 injured as millions hope for humanitarian relief.
And now for a look at the markets with financial markets and foreign currency expert JKonFX founder Joel Kruger. Mr. Kruger.
Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. So what can we expect after Friday's employment report from the U.S.? How will it affect the markets?
Yeah, so it's in some ways it's kind of funny because if we would have seen a number that deviated on either side of expectations significantly, it would have given us better insight in terms of what the Fed's going to do. But because the data came in right on expectation, it's just going to be more of a wait and see now, more data dependent. The number came in relatively, a little bit softer, but relatively in line with expectation. And so, we're still sort of the same Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold scenario, and we'll have to wait and see some more.
I see. And of course, another very interesting development that happened last week on Thursday, May 7th, the UK election.
Yeah.
The Conservatives won, where everybody was saying for the longest time, oh, the Conservatives, they're head on head with Labour. I mean, what are the implications of this victory?
Well, so first of all, I think it's funny with this election also when you look at it compared to the Israel election.
Right.
If you talk about the lead up, the Cameron strategy, and then the result, it's very similar. Everybody was expecting a different result. The strategy was kind of a fear tactic strategy, and then we saw this majority win. I think that the markets are we talked about the other week, the markets are content with the result, that it's sort of the same as. But, with the majority government, that's sort of a slim majority, you do get a little bit of uncertainty. And there's also the question out into 2017 about EU membership, UK membership in the EU, that's going to be put to a vote. So that will longer term affect the market, but short term, some stability.
Right. Obviously, it's more of the same, as you said yourself, and presumably the Conservatives lie better with the market as well.
Yeah, I think the Conservatives are better for business in general. So from a policy standpoint, they are. And then anytime you get the same as the status quo, people are comforted by that, and so they know that nothing is going to change, presumably too much, and so the market finds comfort in that.
What are the other big events coming up on this week?
So it's a relatively light economic calendar this week. Today we had the Bank of England decision, and they stayed on hold. But looking ahead, Wednesday is the big day. We have some growth data out of the Eurozone and Germany. We also have U.S. retail sales. So that's the big day this week. The rest of the calendar is relatively light.
And stocks do remain elevated, relatively high. Where do you see this going from here?
So, we continue to see a strategy across all central banks across the globe to make monetary policies easy as possible. We saw this weekend China again cut rates. And so this strategy is to incentivize and to continue to incentivize money to flow into equities to stimulate the global economy. So we continue to see that, but it's starting to fade a little bit. And my belief is that it's going to lose its effect. And, when the Fed starts to tighten, it's going to have an impact on global equity markets and U.S. equity markets.
Which could start happening by next month, technically. I mean, we've been talking about June or September. Of course, it's more so September lately, but it's really next month. It's just around the corner.
Right. June is still a sliver on the table.
Right.
September is the one that everybody's going to be looking at. But yes, it's going to. Things are starting to we're getting closer and closer to the end of this this era of
On that very note, how might that affect the U.S. dollar? What is your prognosis and what is your forecast for the U.S. dollar?
So I continue to forecast strength in the U.S. dollar. We've seen a nice period of weakness in the dollar over the past several weeks, which is to be expected. We saw a move in the euro. It dropped all the way down to 104.60. That's a 12-year low. And so it was natural to see after an extreme move like that a bit of a bounce. I think that we'll start to see the dollar come back a little bit as I believe the Fed continues to sort of move towards a rate hike.
Okay, well, Joe Kruger, our foreign currency expert from JKonFX, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Fantastic. Bulgaria's economic situation seems hopeless for its working poor who struggle to make ends meet. 1 in 5 Bulgarians is considered poor, while 1 in every 10 people in the EU's most impoverished country live in absolute poverty.
Katya Kulesheva is a highly qualified chemical engineer with 24 years of experience. Even though she holds down a full-time job with a laboratory in Sofia, she struggles to support her family. Katya babysits at the weekend to earn more money, but she still has to count the pennies and can rarely afford more than the basic necessities.
This is all for today's market. €1.50 is what we can spend a day. Our family's income is about 950 leva, and when we pay the monthly instalment on our credit to the bank and all our bills, we're left with 200, 220 leva to live on. That's all.
Earning just 450 euros a month together with her husband, Katya is one of Bulgaria's so-called working poor. Trade union statistics show that almost half of the country's 7 million population is in a similar situation. The optimism that swept the ex-communist country when it joined the European Union in 2007 is now all but gone.
Even worse than the deprivation is the lack of any hope that this can change.
Katya's 60-year-old husband Mircho has a degree with the National Academy of Arts, but he works as a night guard in the local community center, where he also teaches children to draw.
We somehow survive, but we cannot afford absolutely anything. That's it. My wife wonders how other people can have cars, go on holidays and travel abroad, while we could not do anything like this for so many years. But that's how things are.
Bulgaria is the poorest nation in the European Union. It lived under a decade of strict austerity measures imposed by the International Monetary Fund in the mid-90s, as the country grappled with its worst-ever banking and financial crisis. It now has one of the bloc's lowest public debts, but the government has failed to implement vital reforms of its labor market, healthcare, social and education sectors in order to stimulate growth.
Many Eastern European countries, which also lagged seriously behind the EU, managed to catch up little by little, but they started the reforms earlier. We lost the first 7 years with the hyperinflation and the collapse of banks that raised people's savings, and in practice we only had a period of 10 years between 1998 and 2008 when we were growing.
Bulgaria's traditionally low economic activity doesn't help, leaving many to get by however they can. Katya and Mircho's son Martin, who is a music student, chirps in, basking in the street for a handful of coins. But even the upbeat tunes can do little to lift a somber mood.
And now for a look at what else is new in the economy in Media Watch. Daniel Roth.
How's it going?
Good, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we're talking about Hillary Clinton, we're talking about the US elections, we're talking about
Sheldon Adelson, of course, and the Koch brothers, of course.
Koch brothers.
Behind the candidates are these mega donors,
yes.
And the Atlantic, Peter Beinart, who's a columnist for the Atlantic, wrote this piece talking about the advent of a really new era in U.S. politics, where there's these super PACs, and Hillary Clinton's actually the first Democrat to really embrace super PACs. Of course, Obama had them in 2012, had a super PAC, but kept...
PAC, just for our viewers, basically meaning a way for an instrument for rich people to donate.
It's an organization that can take unlimited funds for candidates because they're at arm's length. Mm-hmm. Now, Obama didn't do any fundraisers for his super PAC. Right. Hillary Clinton is the first Democrat to do this. Mm-hmm. These super PACs are largely funded by billionaires like Sheldon Adelson, who's right now dealing with allegations in court of connections to organized crime. The Koch brothers, who are connected to all sorts of climate justice movements and things like this, that they've been denying climate change in the U.S. and stuff like that. These donors are talking about hundreds of millions, even $1 billion that they're going to be spending on these elections. Now, Peter Beinart, what he's writing about in the Atlantic is, okay, if we're in this era of huge money, you can't even call it big money, but huge money, mega money, the role of the media is that the media needs to start exposing these mega donors the way they do politicians, because at the end of the day, the mega donors are actually as important as these politicians. You may not be able to draw a direct line from this donor wants this to be done, so it gets done in 2 years.
But that is actually what it is anyways, isn't it?
This is what we find.
Right. Nothing new under the sun. What else is new here?
So we have from Alternet this piece about the privatization of prisons. Right. It used to be, it happens in pieces. It's not just that prisons in all cases become private institutions.
Which has also happened.
It also happens, but also in small pieces, in increments. You see things like the phone plans on public telephones become private telephones. So it used to cost $4 approximately to make a call from prison to family for an hour. Now it costs something like $17 for a 15-minute call to your family. So you start to see, first of all, prices going up. Second of all, you're seeing that enormous amounts of that money is going to taxes. So you start to see that the authorities, the public authorities, are making money off the privatization of their own institutions. So you see that it becomes more worth their while to keep people in jail working with these systems.
Interesting, so they can continue paying the phone bills. Well, Dan Roth, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That is the end of our Economy Magazine, your daily source for economic and financial reports at I-24 News. I promise you, we will not be privatized. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Thanks for joining us, and see you again tomorrow.